Let's get into that first big story. Joe Rogan leads move to Gettr after Twitter bans Dr. Robert Malone, Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene. Rogan's move comes after Twitter banned Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Dr. Malone for COVID misinformation. But I don't think Joe Rogan signed up for Gettr because of Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think he did it mostly because Dr. Malone told him on his show he was banned, and then he signed up for Gettr. Now, I want to make one very important point before we get into all of this stuff. Joe Rogan is the biggest podcast in the world. Even still, after leaving YouTube and iTunes, still the biggest podcast. I got to say, I see his numbers put out by, Spotify compared to Nielsen ratings. Spotify is saying, this is Luke Rudkowski on Twitter.
I heard about this guy before.
He's pretty good. He's pretty good. Joe Rogan Experience, 11 million viewers per show. Wow.
Holy cow.
11 million. That is substantially larger than what we get on this show across the board.
True.
And we could only hope to ever reach that level of viewership. But that's Joe Rogan. Of course it is. When he says, hey, guys, I'm kind of worried about the censorship. I'm going to get up on Gettr. There's going to be a lot of regular people who aren't deeply entrenched in politics who are going to do the same. And this is huge in the battle against censorship. It could be good. Could be bad. Now, it is good, but there could be some bad to it. I'll say this. A lot of people who are being censored, who have been banned, have found a voice on other platforms like Parler, Gab, Gettr, etc. But the big tech, collusion comes after all these platforms. We saw what happened to Parler. We saw what happened to Gab. Gab starts building its own infrastructure. Gettr may experience something similar. But at the very least, for the time being, if you get banned from Twitter, that's somewhere you can go and see many people talking about, certain ideas. It's not perfect. But I think coming into this year, the big risk is that if we have two separate echo chambers and people can no longer communicate at all, well, then I think the divide in this country is going to get way, way worse.
Absolutely. We're having one of the key instrumental figures that created the mRNA vaccine. We're having congressmen and women being banned from expressing their dissent towards the narrative, and they're getting axed. They're getting their ability to talk to their constituents removed away from them by what power, what godlike authority, big tech social media that literally just deemed it to be not appropriate for the general public to hear. I'm sorry. I mean, once you start censoring information, once you stop eliminating the people to even have a debate or an honest conversation, you're on the wrong side of history. And what Joe Rogan has done is he has put people who have been censored in a way where their voice could actually be heard. They could actually release their ideas to the general public. And this is a huge step against the big tech social media monopolies. And this is why I joined Gettr, because, and again, I don't even know much about Gettr. I still need to do my research. I still want some kind of reassurances that Gettr won't become the next Twitter. But still, this is a swell of movement of people saying, hey, this is crazy. I can't deal with this. I want free speech.
Zed, did you sign up for Gettr?
I have not signed up for Gettr yet. I am on Rumble, which is a YouTube competitor.
Yeah, we use Rumble.
So, I think something important to acknowledge here. I think a lot of people, they look at these decisions by these companies and they say, well, they're private companies. They're behaving and they get to control who their users and their customers are, just as any store or any business organization would. Something people have to understand is that over the past few years, the government has increasingly leaned on these companies. Democrats will bring these people before hearings. They'll bring up inflammatory content. They'll talk about this. And they'll basically ask the companies why they aren't censoring more. Now, the government, of course, has various regulatory powers it could impose on these companies that could, cost them profit. That could reduce their market share. That could even break them up. And I think that a lot of what these companies have been doing over the past few years, for instance, what they did with the Hunter Biden stories, where Facebook and Twitter were throttling the story, making it difficult to even click the link to go and read the New York Post story about President Biden's son. I think a lot of what they're doing that preemptively to avoid potential regulation from the Democrats. So it's not so simple as private companies simply making enlightened decisions, playing hall monitor on speech. They're actually doing this with political aims in mind, in that they know that this party is in power in Washington right now, so they have to keep them happy. And I think there's a lot of Democrats. I think there were some Democrats who were interviewed about it, like Pramila Jayapal, who were very much in favor of Marjorie Taylor Greene being removed from Twitter. They probably wanted them to go further than that. So I think, you have to understand this whole thing's an ecosystem. It's not just a company acting in a vacuum. I mean, I think Facebook did a 24-hour suspension of Marjorie Taylor Greene almost immediately after Twitter removed her,
they
right?
work in concert.
I would actually disagree with you. I don't think big tech is afraid of politicians. I would say politicians are afraid of big tech, especially with the amount of money that they put into the lobbying business. I think they're the biggest, one of the biggest lobbying efforts in all of Washington, D.C., and they control a lot of power because they get to see everything that politicians do. Now, you don't need the CIA anymore. You got Facebook literally knowing when you're going to take a dump. So if they know that, they're tracking and databasing all these politicians and probably have a list of dirty laundry against them, and they could go to them and be like, hey, we know what you Googled. We know what you looked into. We know the private videos you watch on this and this website. We could release that to the general public unless you do what you want us to do. So I think big tech, especially with how they were working with the intelligence agencies from their beginning, are the ones really in charge here from my perspective. But again, I might be wrong.
Think about how insane it is to take down an actively sitting politician, right? Twitter banning Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, first of all, banning Trump. That was crazy. People don't realize this, man. You get the CNNs, you get all these networks being like, an insurrection occurred, so we must remove the current president from all of these social media platforms so he can't communicate. He's not going away. His followers aren't going away. This is not shutting anything down. It's only proving to the people who don't like you, you're as bad as they said you were. If you've got people, if they're telling us that there's an insurrection, you've got people who genuinely think the Democrats and the neocons are like evil and need to be removed or whatever. And then you decide that the one person they do like, Trump, is going to be removed from public discourse. That just makes it worse. It makes it substantially worse. I think it was George Washington. There was this, I'm blanking on the guy's name, but there was a conspiracy. Do you guys remember this? Like after the revolution, America couldn't pay its debts and a bunch of soldiers weren't paid. So there was like some insurrection and George Washington was like, no, we got to let these guys go. If we prosecute or persecute them, it'll only make things worse.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember the full details. And we talked about it on the show once, but that's what a lot of people talked about back during the insurrection. People much smarter than I, mind you. They said perhaps amnesty for these people is the best way to do this, to say, look, we are one country. We need to come together. We don't want to make these problems worse. Instead, the establishment, the intelligence agencies, the DOJ have all done everything in their power to make this as bad as possible. And it's not just the DOJ. It's not just the government. It's the big tech companies. Now, removing Marjorie Taylor Greene. For what? COVID misinformation, they said, and Dr. Malone. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene's not a scientist, but she is a leader in the federal government. They may not like that she is, but she is. Dr. Malone is a scientist, a dissenting one. When you ban dissent, that's the opposite of science. They're just proving to everyone the problem is bad or as bad or worse than they realized.
And let's remember something. When like-minded people gather together, they tend to become more extreme, right? So it was in the past, it would have been a matter of, Dr. Robert Malone's on Twitter. He's on YouTube. He's discussing these things with other scientists. You can weigh what he says against other people. The truth can win out that way, right? Let's say someone's a huge fan of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now they're just going to go watch her on Rumble or view her messages on Gettr. They may not see someone debating with her, discussing with her. They might grow even more kind of closed-minded in that direction, right? They're reducing contact between people of different ideologies because they're just deciding that certain ideologies are verboten, that they're forbidden to be spoken. They're ending up segmenting and segregating people off, and that may actually create more extreme echo chambers in the long run. And I think that this, again, I think because of all the political considerations that are happening right now, I mean, these companies tend to be run by more left-leaning people. They have a more left-leaning government in D.C. that they are somewhat managing or dealing with right now. I don't think they think 3 steps ahead when it comes to a lot of this stuff, right? And I think, again, what you pointed out in terms of those historical examples, we've seen that many times throughout history, not only with George Washington, who decided after the American Civil War, there was a long process of reconciliation between the North and the South that wasn't resolved maybe for 100 years.
I don't think it was ever resolved.
After World War II, I think that many of the allies, they kept actually a fair bit of the German leadership. Of course, many of them were brought to trial and executed, but some of the German leadership was maintained. A big part of the Japanese leadership was maintained. And I think they did that because they didn't want to throw those societies into a further civil war. They didn't want to make them feel marginalized and repressed. They wanted to say, hey, look, this war was wrong. We defeated you, but we're going to bring you into the community of nations now, right? They wanted to make them feel included. And I think that mostly worked with Germany and Japan and Italy and these Axis powers. And I think that has generally been the wiser path to take here. And I think that, in a few days, I imagine with the January 6th anniversary, we're going to see a lot of mulling over this. New York Times already said every day is January 6th now, right? You can't move past it. You can't reconcile with these people. You can't try to come back to a normal country. They seem to be wanting there to be some kind of civil disturbance or war, but it has no endpoint and it has no goal either, right? Because what does this conflict entail even? It's just a matter of permanent grievance or resentment.
Divide and conquer. I think it's deliberate. When you look at these echo chambers, they're not only created with censorship, they're created with the algorithms that promote people from just having their views regurgitated back to them by people who have the same political ideology. And I think it's meant so we do fight each other. So, of course, we don't really truly look at what's causing our problems. We look at each other and see that's the problem, our common man, our neighbor. We should go after him. We should fight them because they think not like me. And again, that type of ideology is absolutely fascistic, and it's disgusting, and it's something we need to fight back on as much as we can right now.
Take a look at this this tweet here from everyone's favorite CNN personality, Brian Stelter. He says, "Watch how this Twitter user mocks reporters for talking candidly about the trauma associated with the Capitol attack." I just quote tweeted it and wrote trauma. The trauma.
I like the first reply to it. I think that's pretty.
Yeah, that's perfect.
The first reply. Oh, it's Stewie rocking
Stewie,
back and forth. Stewie from Family Guy. The trauma. Okay, here's what you need to understand. If you are on the ground during these like riotous moments, it can be stressful. But for many of us, we've been through tons of them. I've been, Brazil, I think, was one of the most intense. Thailand was probably the scariest because people were actually killing each other there. But to say that in any way foreign conflict, like there are foreign war reporters and conflict reporters, much braver than I, much smarter than I, who have traveled to many countries facing real dangers, who don't have trauma. And many do, don't get me wrong. For journalists in America who are not on the ground to be discussing their trauma over an event they did not witness, I think it just goes to show you how insane the whole system is getting. Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to watch live, you can check out this channel Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you want more unfiltered and uncensored content with all of these guests, go to timcast.com and become a member. All of these guests you know and love in exclusive segments on our website where we are unrestricted in what we talk about, so you'll definitely not want to miss it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time.